the opportunity to learn. And what you just said just now, is vital about your background and how you see coming together.
Yeah, I think in this day and age and so on, where there's so much impact on our natural environment and our wildlife and things like that, I try and promote a much more holistic attitude towards it's not just an RSPCA or anthropomorphic system, but a broader spectrum of things, and so that Homo sapiens built up of numerous types of people and things like that, and so we've got to harness those people and not drive them away from a campaign, for example, like the rhino story and things like that. So with my own background, urban person living in Johannesburg, a normal urban life, and then being rescued by Ian Player through canoeing and things like that, that opened up a whole new world for me. And so I went through the whole apprenticeship of being a young ranger, boots on the ground, binoculars and canoes and horses I didn't like, because I was a lake ranger. Hated horses. And also I went through that process, and a lot of my colleagues did the same, joined as young rangers and so on, and educated themselves or went for higher education later on. And when I was much older and in my 60s and so on, I managed to get a master's degree in coastal management. So right throughout my life, I'm trying to move into other spheres where I can be more effective. And I must say, with a bit of snobbishness, if you've got an MSc, your CV looks a hell of a lot better, and you're more likely to get projects and things like that. But nevertheless, my teachers were the Zulu people, and their knowledge was so profound and so based on ecological factors and things like that, not pretty anthropomorphic sort of attitudes and that, but realistic. And they will eat a number of these species and things like that. If the resource is sufficiently robust, I'm not against that at all. Wildlife can be used in various ways, from for its aesthetic value, for its wilderness values, and all that sort of thing. But it has other meanings as well. And so I've moved into the sphere of thinking about all these sort of problems today and these ecologically, because we're all part of this ecosystem. And if we don't get it right, we're in serious trouble. And so there are a lot of different factions in this rhino thing as well. There are a lot of people who, everybody's applying their own philosophies and things like that, but there must be a common ground that people come together and decide really how are we going to save these bits. Like more aeroplanes, more remote aircraft, or boots on the ground, better fences, education. There are a whole bunch of things that we've got to consider to try and resolve this problem and things like that. So that's my focus. I look at it ecologically. How does it fit into the ecosystem? How do we fit into the ecosystem? And so that's my philosophy nowadays. And from one day to the next, one has to adapt to that, not fix in the thing that you're going to become a tree hugger. Although I hug trees as well, love it. But it's all part of my philosophy about the holisticness. We're sitting here next to a forest here, brilliant forest. This is my Shangri-La, where I can sit here. I no longer live in a game reserve, but I live next to these wonderful trees and so on. So this enriches my life, being where I am in this house on the north coast. Also, I found something else to distract my focus only on the ecology, but music and listening to the birds here. Music and conservation are married. And that's why I now often go to Durban to listen to concerts, and I've got wonderful friends in the Natal Philharmonic Orchestra who I've befriended, and I take them into the bush and they take me into their world. So I'm trying to find a balance for myself, because we also got to nurture ourselves, because you're giving out your energies all the time, and you've got to bring back something to nurture feed your own soul, and that's why the wilderness is vitally important. But my main thrust is that I'm aware of the rhino poaching and the tragedy what's happening and things like that, but my real focus is on saving the environment. If you've got the environment working well for you, the rhino will be saved. That's the whole thing. If we lose areas, which we are doing, then that's the rhino and the wilderness gone. So my energy is going to really, to try and secure these areas. And I in this day and age, in 2014, what's happening to our reserves is an absolute tragedy. And a place where I worked and loved so much was in Dumor Game Reserve. And it's really, it's in a bad way. It's just everything's going wrong there. And what is going wrong has been created by us, Homo sapien. So we've got to try and heal those sort of things. That's where I would put my energies and things like that. And I'm so appreciative of people like yourselves, you and Susan, for doing what you're doing, because you're not getting enough rewards for what you do. I do through my work, but and you've got to nurture yourself as well in terms of your passion and your effectiveness and things like that. And I take my hat off to the amount of energy that you both put into this whole thing. Living in England and wherever you travel and things like that. So you're doing a remarkable job.
Your relationship with nature and how we connect with people like yourself, it's made such a difference to our life. I've been coming here for 10 years now, and every time it's an enriching experience, and I suppose just having quiet times, as we do on this deck, and having tea, I suppose it's very British, but having tea with someone like yourself has just changed my life. It's changed Susan, I can tell, just as Ian changed so many lives.
But tea has played a major part in people with English backgrounds and things like that. And there's wonderful stories during the Second World War. In the midst of a violent battle, the commander of the troops would say, "Ceasefire, we're going to go and have a cup of tea." And the same with us, during this fight for the rhino and things like that. It's wonderful to have a cup of tea. Britishness comes out in you. And so it's a reward. And we've got to continually reward yourself.
Absolutely.
I tell some of my colleagues that we all belong to a thing called the Game Rangers Association of Africa, and we're all pretty well getting towards grey beard, sort of octogenarian and things like that. And I met them at a presentation. I was given an award, and I told my colleagues, I said, we must reward ourselves, because you don't have all your energy sucked out. You've got to feed your own soul. And I said, by the way, I went to a health spa, and the house nearly came down to think of a game ranger going to a health spa. So I said, and also I had a pedicure. Well, that was beyond the comprehension. But we got terrible feet, from walking without shoes and things like that. And so but I drew the line at them wanting to paint my toenails. So they'll never live that down. They were so funny, but I had to say, go out there and enjoy yourself. I do it with music and listening to the birds as we're doing now. This forest here feeds my soul. It might be small, but it's diverse. I've got, at night you have owls calling, 2 species of owls calling. You've got bush babies, you've got huge fruit bats, you've got vervet monkeys, and I love being with the vervet monkeys. Most people hate them, but they were here before us, so we've got to accommodate them.
Absolutely.
So I find it wonderful that we still have wildlife here, in this little micro habitat and things like that. So that's the way I'd like to continue, with my life. I'll give help where it's needed, but I draw the line where, anthropomorphism becomes more powerful than ecologically sort of resolving a problem.
Sure. Yeah. And we have to share half.
Yeah, no, sure. Yes, yeah. I just wonder about our future. I don't. One can become very pessimistic with regard to, population increases and so on. I get advice given to me just recently by one of the best ecologists in South Africa and in Africa, Roddy Ward. He phoned me and he said, he asked me what I thought about global warming. And I'm ambivalent about global warming. We don't know, our history's been too short but he said, don't worry about global warming because global swarming is more important. And that's exactly what is happening now. Our resources, our space and everything is, and it's now resulting in all this internecine conflict and murder and bombings, and so the world's in a terrible mess. And I relate that to just too many people, too many impoverished people living on the edge, and so that's my. I have to be cold and look at this thing. I can do nothing about reducing the human population. I can't. It's out of control. In 2050, we're going to have another 8 billion people to cope with, and we can't cope now. Our rivers are, here where I live, here are sewers. And our soils are becoming impoverished because of many, many decades of agriculture and poisonous chemicals being put into and things like that. And areas which were forest and thereafter the open grasslands which became sugarcane and things like that. That dominates this whole thing. But I think it's quite a lot better to have sugarcane than it is to have urban development. We're just covering our entire environment in concrete. So once you've got to try and keep a level head and understand the whole complexity of the ecology and social issues that govern our lives and things like that. But you've got to. There's so many nice things about it. As I say, going to a concert and listening to good music, which we did, you and Susan and myself. That I came out feeling wonderful.
Yes.
And listened to this young soprano who's I don't know where she comes from, but she's a Zulu lady. She does come from the Transvaal, but what a voice! And playing in a baroque ensemble at Marion Hill. And you just come out feeling, gosh, it's good to be Homo sapiens. And
sure.
How extraordinary sort of complexity there are in us, and we're given so many good things.
Yes.
And music is magnificent, and wilderness. To me, wilderness is the keystone to our well-being, health and body.
Well, just as we heard last night with the recording that I made at the Royal Geographic Society with Ian talking about wilderness and the benefits that he's experienced with it, and how fantastically he's shared that with an audience around the world.
Yes. Now Ian, who has been my great friend and mentor for many, many years, he brought me into conservation through canoeing and things like that. And I was with him in his last days recently, and I miss him enormously, and we will all miss him. But what he's done is left a legacy that we've got to follow and carry on. And he's no longer with us, but he said he left lots of tasks for us to complete, which he wasn't able to do himself.
Yeah, I think his spirit and his energy will, carry forward in all of us.
Yeah.
And I think if we can use that recording and put it onto YouTube and help others have a better understanding about the meaning of life and how we relate to nature, I think that's, what comes across so beautifully in his talk.
Yes.
And I'm going to try and get that up on YouTube.
No, he's left us with huge responsibilities and so on. He's carried this whole thing with the help of a lot of people, including his conservation colleagues and in the game departments and so on. And he and I have worked with some of the most marvelous people in conservation. And so now I do consultancy work, and I make sure that I do projects that I can't enjoy as a tourist, and I'm not. I go to these wonderful places not as a tourist, but to do some work, but to enjoy the place as much as I. So I've been referred to as a well-paid tourist, which is not true. I'll produce the best work I possibly can,
Right.
but at the same time wallow in those beautiful clean seas of Mozambique and the west coasts and all over Africa where I've worked and things like that. So each one of those work has been a reward for me.
Yes.
Visiting hunter-gatherers in East Africa, meeting the place where Adam and Eve, where the whole thing started, of all humanity started from this one place in Kenya.
Yeah.
Seeing that and meeting the people today who are genetically exactly the same as us. So those are the rewards that we must give ourselves and things like that.
Well, I'm sure you've touched so many people in your life too. I mean, you've had an effect on the way I think about things, and Susan as well. And in many ways, we'd just like to thank you so much for being who you are.
Well, thank you for you've given me an opportunity to talk, because we are regarded as a bit sort of what's the word, antisocial.
Yes.
But with people that we like, we can become voluble. It's not, and probably talk too much. But no, it's very good that that one. Otherwise, you've got to share these ideas.
Yes.
And only when you talk about them do they now have resonance. And then you can build up on them like what those things you put together, Legos.
Yeah.
So that to me is the the wonderful part of the privilege of being a Homo sapiens in this magnificent world which we are at the moment torturing.
Well, I'm sure this talk will give people food for thought, because it's always an enriching experience hearing someone like you talk, who has so much experience, and as you mentioned about the holistic perspective, I don't think we always have the opportunity to have that. It's all drawn from the emotional side and our love for nature, but hearing what you're able to share with us just makes it a bit more interesting and understanding about how we should be challenging ourselves to think differently.
Yeah, but your role is so vitally important. We may have some good ideas and things like that, but you have the ability and the skills to send that out to a huge audience through your skills on the media and things like that. That's vitally important. Otherwise, we become introverted, and we, whereas you getting it out into the open and things like that. And thank heavens that you would do it, because we haven't got the skills or anything to do it. We're good at one thing, maybe, looking after the environment.
Sure.
But we need that energy to push it out. And this rhino thing, one good thing is it's really it's got people, sort of on a fantastic sort of path to understanding the environment, and also defending our beleaguered animals and
habitat
and wilderness. That wilderness thing is vitally important for our well-being.
Yes,
spiritually,
absolutely,
and everything other thing.
Yeah.
And when there's with a big mine that's proposed for right on top of the Umfolozi Game Reserve's wilderness area, it's an unthinkable sort of thing. So therefore, it's being fought against now at the moment. The local people don't want it because of it's a coal mine, and the dust from a mine that's quite close to Umfolozi at the moment. It's causing huge health problems and so on, and pollution of a vital river system. So we can't afford to lose these, and we've got certain people who are fighting lone battles, like Sheila Berry, as a wonderful psychologist, fighting against and organising it, and having wonderful people from the area where the mine's proposed fighting against this thing. So it's going to be a long battle, but we're all confident that we're going to kill that mine.
Yes. And her campaign on the internet is?
Well, through the Wilderness Foundation,
yes.
The Wilderness School. That's her her foundation,
Yes.
which was started by Ian Player.
Yeah.
And she has been working with Ian for a long time over this, and
Yes.
doing a really marvelous job. And I think people have got lots of issues to deal with now, and it's very difficult to harness people's emotion or their help. But through the media, like Avaz and all this can be done. She deserves accolades, and for what she's doing.
Well, thanks, Paul. We
Okay.
really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you for allowing me to talk. More encouraging.